Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special online event today. It's called The Mysticism of Christ, Experiencing the Sacred Teachings of Jesus for Spiritual Awakening. My name is Stephen Dine. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network, and I feel blessed to be with you here today because, I've been inspired by so many teachers and traditions from around the world, but really one of my primary guides and inspirations has been Jesus. And not just the Jesus we inherit from religious systems, but the mystical Jesus, the real emissary of a higher pathway into our divinity. And he is really, it's hard to sometimes peel away the layers of history and projection and all of it, but we're going to get to do so with somebody who's really been at the depths, an investigator of mystical Christianity, the real Jesus, the true teachings. And his name is Matthew Fox. He's a renowned spiritual pioneer, and he's the author of more than 40 books. He's taught for 55 years in this arena. He has been provocative. He has been eye-opening. He's challenged church orthodoxy. He's opened new pathways. He's really been a pioneer of the Christ path on every level. So, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for this invitation. And I like your language about the real Jesus. And also another word you used in inviting me was the torchbearers, which I like. It's a wonderful, fresh way of talking about the mystics and the prophets who tried to live the Jesus story and the Jesus message, and have often run up against a certain amount of, well, what should I say, bumps in the road that the church put in front
That's
of them.
charitable.
Exactly. But they persevered, and that's been my joy in life, is to be able to examine some of these wonderful mystics and prophets over the centuries and to translate them, if you will, into our time, because all of us need to get a new story about Jesus that gets closer to the real thing. And there have been scholars who've been working on it, the historical Jesus scholars. But it's not just about scholars, it's about everyday prophets and mystics that we're all called to be. And there are a lot of them in our lineage. And they reach out, especially in our time, to other lineages. For example, Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk, was very close to the Dalai Lama and very close to Thich Nhat Hanh. And so that marriage of Buddhism and Christianity that happened between them was really significant. And we're living that kind of time, aren't we? When we're rubbing shoulders, elbows with one another from different traditions and digging deeper and finding out, what do Jesus and Buddha have in common, and what do Muhammad and the Jewish tradition have in common. And this is all part of living in today's world.
Well, Matthew, this is an exciting and couldn't be more timely exploration, since we've seen so much chaos, rising authoritarianism, all these different things often done in the name of Jesus. And I feel like it's just crazy making sometimes that people will say they're doing something inspired by Jesus that is totally opposed to what he really was here to teach. So I'm excited that to hear more from you today. And I also want to let everyone know right up front, we're going to have a brand new 6-month immersion with Matthew. It's going to be an unprecedented deep dive into the path of Christ consciousness with many of the leading luminaries to complement what Matthew is teaching here as well. So we're going to have a deep dive with Matthew, and we'll share more about that towards the end of the hour. So Matthew, I want to first get a little context of your own journey into Jesus and the path of Christ consciousness, and how did you start to go beyond sort of the surface stories and the sort of mythology and make a more real, direct, mystical contact with the essence of what he was teaching?
Part of it is that I grew up in the Midwest in Wisconsin, and the experience of God in nature. Wisconsin's a very beautiful state, and a lot of rivers and lakes and greenery. And all that moved me very deeply as a child. And it drew me into asking questions about religion. And so did reading Tolstoy's War and Peace when I was a junior in high school. I told a friend it blew my soul wide open and wanted to examine what happened. Of course, I had a mystical experience, but I didn't have words for it then. I just knew it was something big that happened to me. And so I was attracted into Dominican order. The Dominicans ran the parish I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. And because I studied a few different orders, looked at them, but I was moved that this order had an intellectual dimension to it, as well as an aesthetic and a spiritual and a community dimension to it. So I was drawn to the Dominicans, and when I joined them in my uh, young 20s, I was very moved by the practices we did and the study we did. And I was glad for that intellectual dimension, the community dimension. And eventually I was invited to go to Europe for a doctorate in spirituality. And there I met my mentor, Père Chanou, a French Dominican who had worked very hard in the Vatican Council that had just shut down a year or two previously. And he named this tradition of creation spirituality and how it was different from the fall redemption tradition that began with sin. And but creation spirituality begins with the goodness of the world, of the universe. And it also, of course, then links to science, and because scientists are busy telling us what the world's made of and how it happens and all this. And so I was blessed to work with scientists, especially here in the West Coast, where so many scientists live. And so all this came together for me. And there's been some wonderful scholarship and movements in my time, including liberation theology, which links up with creation spirituality very, very closely, and working a lot with artists too. And so there's so many ways to approach Jesus. Howard Thurman, the great African American theologian, he has a marvelous essay on the diversity of Jesus. I want to share that in my teaching because it's a real complete naming that there's so many ways to approach Jesus, and a lot of it is projection, and projection is not always a bad thing, but it can be dangerous. And like you say, some people in a crackpot way invoke Jesus around um, examples of how to lie effectively and how to do the opposite, like the Antichrist rather than the Christ. Instead of, it's about, for some people, it's about gaining power in the name of Christ. And this Christian nationalism of our time is a sad example, but it draws a lot of powerful people and it becomes a movement. So, I think it's a great time to go deeper into who was the real Jesus, what was he really teaching, what was he about, and in the language I developed, he was a mystic, he was a lover, and he was a prophet. He was saying yes, and he was saying no on a deep scale, and it got him in trouble. Obviously, his death. Some people mystify his death, but actually, it was a political act by the empire because they recognized that what he was preaching, compassion and justice and love, was contrary to the way empires usually work. And he was a threat, even though he was utterly uh, simple in his lifestyle and in his way of living and his practice. He wasn't out for political power and the rest, but he reached people's hearts, and this got people moving. And obviously, he was a threat to the empire and those religious figures who identified with the empire in his day. And so that's really what got him killed. So even his crucifixion has been distorted by some interpreters of the story, and they've made so much of the crucifixion that they don't even bother to talk about the Beatitudes or the teachings that he came up with, if you will, much of it from his Jewish tradition, about the primacy of justice and the primacy of compassion and love.
Hmm. I want to circle back with the two terms that you mentioned, mystic and prophets. And it seems like those archetypes are at the core of how you see the Christ path. And maybe share a little bit about why those two archetypes are so important to understanding Jesus and also embodying that Christ path in our modern time.
Yes, William James, the great psychologist, says mysticism is our yes faculty. It's our yes to life. And therefore, it's our love of life. It's our love of existence. And this is where I think today's science helps a lot, explaining to us that we're on this journey. We've been on this journey for 13.8 billion years. And that awakens the awe and the wonder and the gratitude and the reverence for being here. And it awakens us the sacredness of the universe, the sacredness of the earth. And of course, this translates into how are we responding to the suffering of our time, that Mother Earth and so many creatures are facing their own extinction. And we are too, actually. So it allows us, the mysticism, to think big, to take the big picture in, but always in a context of appreciation, gratitude, and love. And then the prophetic archetype is about saying no. It's about saying no to injustice. And Jesus did that. That's how he got himself in trouble. That he was out of the prophetic lineage of Israel. And the other prophets before him, Isaiah and the rest, Jeremiah, they got themselves in plenty of trouble too. And he talked about that. He knew that this was his lineage and he was part of it. And but he also was telling us to be the same, that we're mystics, have this union with the divine. Julian Norris called it our oneing, O-N-E-I-N-G. And others like Thomas Aquinas called it our ecstasies. When we have experience of ecstasy and great joy, that is a mystical experience. And it brings us out of our ego state into a real connection with others, with the whole, with the universe, with its suffering and with its joy and its creativity. So I do play with those archetypes. I think they're very essential regarding the very core of what religion is about, not just Christianity or Judaism, not just the biblical religions alone, but I find it very much in the indigenous. I've been blessed to work a lot with the Lakota religious tradition, the good teachers there, and some other indigenous traditions. So there's more in common in our religions when you go deep enough. And that's what we want to do. I like to do. That's the going into the yes. How do the Buddhists practice the yes dimension? Well, of course, meditation is very important, not just in Buddhism, but around the world, about emptying our minds so that we can be fully present and with a clean windshield, as one Buddhist teacher likes to talk about, and just be with our breath and not take it for granted, be fully present while we're here, and not have regrets on our deathbed that we didn't really enter into a full yes to life, a true biophilia, love of life. And that includes, of course, standing up for life, for love, for compassion, for justice. And that's that prophetic dimension, which is emphasized especially, I think, in the Jewish and biblical tradition. And I think it's one reason that Gandhi said, I learned to say no from the West, that he tells us that it was Jesus' Beatitudes that taught him the practice of nonviolence. And of course, that was imitated by Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights movement and others who followed them, like Mandela. And so, there's a tremendous coming together today, I think, of the wisdom of the spiritual traditions. But of course, myself as a Westerner and as a Christian, I want to go deeper there. Dalai Lama says the number one obstacle to interfaith is a bad relationship with one's own faith tradition. And so we of the West, we really want to explore more deeply, who is this Jesus? What was he really teaching? And who followed him over the centuries in a really authentic way? So we want to bring in these other figures like Hildegard of Bingen, Thomas Aquinas, Julian Norwich, Meister Eckhart, and more contemporary people like Mary Oliver, Father B. Griffiths, and Thomas Merton, and others in our time who have been making this journey and show us and articulate the ways that we can go deeper and not stay at the surface, but go down into what I call the underground river of wisdom that divinity flows in. And we have all these wells, the Buddhist, the Jewish, the Muslim, the indigenous, and the Christian. But the Christians have to clean up their act. And, Thich Nhat Hanh said that. He said, there's nothing in Buddhism that isn't in Christianity, but Christians have to dig deeper to get to their gems because they've been covered up by so many detours over the centuries.
I'd love for you to dive a little further into, how we actually access the mystical knowledge. I know you've written and talked about that sometimes we tend to overemphasize the left brain understanding of Jesus and at the expense of the right brain, and maybe share a little bit more about what that means and how we can actually open our own deeper relationship through that kind of more right brain knowledge.
I think the left brain is more about dogmas and concepts. And there's a role for that, but it shouldn't be the dominant role. The right brain is more about intuition. And those are the experiential and even aesthetic dimensions of religion and of Christianity. And our school system, even seminary school system in the West, is overly committed to the rational brain. And so we kind of have to step out of that modality to give the intuitive brain some breathing room and some practice and build the muscles of the intuitive brain. Now, meditation that is emptying the brain, that is very useful, but it's not enough. I think we also need what I call art as meditation. And so practicing, say, doing play as meditation, or painting as meditation, or poetry, or journaling, or dance. There's so many ways to meditate, and that feeds that right brain, that feeds that intuitive brain. And Einstein himself says values don't come from the left brain, they don't come from the rational brain, they come from the intuitive brain. But he said we live in a culture that honors the rational brain, but ignores the intuitive brain. And he's talking about our educational model. And so over my 50-some years of teaching, I created these models of education that really worked. They worked for adults and they worked for teenagers. I worked with inner city teenagers for a couple of years, and also to try this out. And the people, they had breakthroughs, many breakthroughs, when we had them creating films, for example. And so there are many ways by which to take in the divine, to take in the sacred, to have what Eckhart called breakthrough, which was his name for a mystical experience. And he says, for the person who is awake, breakthrough doesn't happen once a year, once a month, once a week, but many times every day. So mysticism or breakthrough or wanting or ecstasy is not just for the few. It's not for monks and all that. I mean, Christianity's been around about 2,000 years. And that's not real long. And it's only existed during the period that we've called the Piscean age, the age of Pisces. Now we're in the age of Aquarius. So things are shifting. Our minds are shifting. And the age of Aquarius is meant to be the age of the water bearer. Well, water is usually identified with the unconscious, with the deeper dimension of ourselves. And this is one more reason why Christianity needs to reinvent itself today. I talk about Christianity 2.0, that we're moving out of the Piscean age. It's only existed during the Piscean age. And the early Christians knew that. On a lot of the catacombs, and they drew pictures of two fish swimming in the opposite direction because it was the age of Pisces. They knew that. And Jesus talked a lot about fishermen and fishing and all this, and he invited fishermen into his view. And so, but now we're in a new time, and it's also a postmodern time. And so it's really an exciting moment that we can give birth to, well, a Christianity 2.0 that learns from the mistakes of the last 2,000 years, as well as from the grounding and the torchbearers, those who really did do a good version, an authentic version of Jesus' message in their lifetimes, And there were movements such as St. Francis and his order and all that, and Benedict and his order, that certainly tried their best to make it real. But what about for the 21st century? What about for the next 2,000 years? It's obvious we have to help Mother Earth, who is suffering considerably because of our species. So that's a whole big thing. And that's where creation spirituality, putting the word creation first instead of humans, which is what we've been doing as a culture for the last 500 years, being narcissistic, recovering the sacredness of nature and creation and Mother Earth. This is a sine qua non for surviving as a species. And all our traditions, all the religious traditions, have to reinvent themselves, if they will, to come up with ways of working together and ways of supporting the spiritual warrior that's in all of us to stand up to the exploitation of Mother Earth in our time.
Beautifully said, and what a noble mission for the moment. Let's circle back. I wanted to bring in another element of the understanding of the real historical Jesus and how things have gotten distorted, which is working with the original Aramaic translations and how that really gives a whole different insight and understanding of some of what was taught. So maybe you could share a little bit about why that's important and some of the flavor of Jesus that comes through in Aramaic, and maybe show how that applies in a particular domain like the Our Father prayer.
Yeah, such an important contribution that's been made in our lifetime, along with the Jesus Seminar movement and so forth. The return to Jesus' original language. Jesus was a peasant, and he spoke Aramaic, which is kind of an indigenous version of Hebrew. He was not formally educated, and Aramaic, like a lot of indigenous languages, is very poetic. And it plays with words a lot. And there are many meanings to each word. So this movement, and I've been close to one of its founders, Neil Douglas Clatts, was a faculty member with me many years ago for several years. And he even invited me to write the foreword to his first book on the Aramaic Jesus, which included the translation of the Our Father and the Beatitudes from the Aramaic, not from Greek or Latin, which were the basic texts that were distributed, if you will, in the West for translating the Bible. And I'll just give you an example, and it's a beautiful thing to pray these. Whenever we have one of our cosmic masses, we always share the Aramaic Our Father, and invariably afterwards, people say, "Can I get a copy of that?" It's like a whole new prayer for people, because people can get over familiar with prayers. They memorize them as a child or something. You just keep going until you die. But what if the translation is very heady, which happens in Greek and Latin and German and English and Spanish and other. So let me give you a concrete example. So the first line of the Our Father prayer, and of course this was a prayer that Jesus taught his disciples when they asked him, "Teach us to pray." We usually hear it this way: "Our Father who art in heaven." Okay, that's the translation from Greek and Latin. But this is what it means in Aramaic. There are many meanings to it. There are 7 different meanings that Neil Douglas Clatts puts forward in his book. And by the way, Neil Douglas Clatts will be teaching with us. We'll have outside teachers in this class, and he's one of the people that I'll invite to teach. "O Birther, Father, Mother of the cosmos, you create all that moves in light." Now that translation is as accurate as the familiar one, "Our Father who art in heaven." But listen to it again. "O Birther, Father, Mother of the cosmos, you create all that moves in light." Notice how cosmic it is. Notice how mystical it is. And then you want to pause it with it. What does that mean? You move in light, Now here's a second translation. Again, equally accurate, if you will, because this language is very playful. "O thou, the breathing life of all, creator of the shimmering sound that touches us." The shimmering sound. What is that? There's so much to connect to in that translation. And it just opens up one's heart and soul and mind to the deeper Christ, to the real Jesus, because these were the words he was speaking. This was the meaning behind his words. Now, as I say, there are 5 other stanzas like that, different ways to translate that one line, Our Father who art in heaven. And notice, of course, that gender-wise, it's very balanced, much more balanced than just talking about our Father. Now, let me do just one more. The next line is traditionally, hallowed be thy name. Hallowed be thy name. But again, in Aramaic, focus your light within us, make it useful, as the rays of a beacon show the way. Focus your light within us, make it useful, as the rays of a beacon show the way. Now, again, there's more faithfulness and there's more beauty and there's more opening up of mind and heart than there is in just the line, the very familiar line, maybe the overly familiar line, hallowed be thy name.
It's amazing just how different it is. I mean, it's like the language really shapes consciousness, and it's like such a different language that really shaped this wisdom transmission that than what we get.
Exactly. And Douglas Clarence has spent his whole life now translating the scriptures, such as the Our Father and the Beatitudes, and many other familiar passages in the Christian Bible through the Aramaic. And it does exactly what you just said. And it opens people up. And that's the whole point, isn't it? You know, because you can get so dulled because you memorize something back when you're 7 years old that you just keep repeating that you lose the question involved in prayer. That you become dulled and it becomes rote instead of really prayer. But seeing it that way, it's just fresh for people. It wakes them up. And Jesus said that, and. And that goes through the entire prayer. And again, there are 7 versions of each line in that prayer. So just that alone is a marvelous way to rediscover the living Jesus and the authentic, the real Jesus, this peasant a man who turned the world upside down, not through sword and war and shouting or being elected to something, but just through his profound spiritual lineage. And of course, so much of it came from his Jewish practice and lineage, but he boiled it down. He took out the essence, and it was enough to get him in a lot of trouble, but to spread some really good news before they caught up with him, before the empire caught up with him.
There's another area I want to go into in terms of this embodiment of Christ consciousness that often gets overlooked in some of the focus on the sacrificing for our sins and some of the motifs that the church often propagates. But the sense of joy and connection to the cosmos and each other, I think you've really done a wonderful job of bringing that forward, that's part of this Christ nature that we want to cultivate and bring forward. And maybe share a little bit of why that is, even when times are dark and things look grim, like why is that cultivation so central?
Especially when times are dark and things look grim, because humans are capable of creating a lot of darkness, a lot of grimness, and we have to see bigger than just the human. And that's what I love about these pre-modern mystics, including Jesus, that they don't begin with the human. That's psychology, to begin with the human, but cosmology is about beginning with what is, with the universe. And so it's so amazing. You know, the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, doesn't mention sin once. It talks about the universe, and it began in the dark and it became light. The first thing made was light, and then talks about all these other creatures and everything is called good. This was good. The trees were good. Night separate from day was good. It goes through all the goodness there. And then at the end of Genesis 1, it mentions humans. And from that point of view, it's paralleling the evolution story today, that we're the last on the scene. And then it says, with humans there too, this whole circle of creation is very good. Now, that's the very first page of the Bible, and yet so many preachers don't begin that way. They begin with sin, which isn't talked about until the second and third chapter of the Bible. And so the whole role of joy is already out of the game, out of the picture if you begin with sin, and only humans are sinning. You know, Thomas Merton said, every non-two-legged creature is a saint. And why could he say that? Every bear is a saint and every tree is a saint. Where does he get that? Your dog or your cat is a saint? Because they're being true to themselves. Rabbi Heschel says sin is a refusal to become who we are. Well, my dog, he's a dog all day long. He's being true to himself. And so he's not a sinner. A sin is someone who's going off the track, you see, of being a dog or a human being. And so our species is kind of unique for that. And the truth is, we came very late to the scene. And that's where science comes in. And so beginning, like the pre-moderns do, with the universe itself. Like Hildegard of Bingen was painting pictures of the cosmos. And the whole tradition of the cosmic Christ is part of that. The whole universe is sacred. And when we're losing the sense of the sacred, which we do in war and beating up on Mother Earth and the rest, we have to recover it. Well, Thomas Berry says the only way to recover a sense of the sacred is to realize the universe is a primary sacred reality. So this tradition of joy in the presence of the sacred then is always with us because the universe is sacred. Aquinas said the most excellent thing in the universe is not the human. The most excellent thing in the universe is the universe itself. And all of us, all creatures are here to serve the universe itself. And he also said that joy, pure joy is God's, and this demands companionship. So Aquinas has an answer to today's scientific question, why is the universe here? No, people have many answers, but Aquinas is we're here for joy. And it's the divine joy that brought things into existence and sustains them. And that when there's joy, there's celebration, isn't there? You don't want to keep your joy to yourself. And so that's how Aquinas names the story of the universe, that it was divinity wanting to share the joy that is the divine joy. And we are made for joy. He says joy is a human's greatest achievement, that we're here for joy, nothing less. And that's what love brings. So love and joy go together. And so it all adds up. And so this is the creation tradition. People like Aquinas and Julian of Norwich and Eckhart and Hildegard and others celebrating the joy, that this is our deepest capacity. And it gets, of course, forgotten or stomped on because there's also a lot of suffering, and there's also a lot of malice that humans are capable of. And but this is why the four paths of creative spirituality, they help us to find the joy even in the darkness, and the mystics help with that. You know, John of the Cross is famous. He was a poet in the 16th century. He suffered a lot. He's famous for naming the dark night of the soul. But it's so interesting. His great poem on the dark night of the soul is only 8 stanzas. The last 4 stanzas are about love. He's searching for love from the beginning, searching for his beloved, which is his name for God. But at the end, it happens that he and his beloved meet, but they go through a lot of struggle first. And so the dark night of the soul, I talk about the dark night of our species today that we're in. You can't see the joy real clearly. You've got to go deep and remember the joy in your life, remember the beauty and the blessings in your life. Keep that with you, even as you go through suffering and struggle. But the good news is that the joy has the last word. And that's the Jesus story of crucifixion versus Easter, too.
I love that. The joy has the last word. Well, Matthew, you're just a fountain of so much deep insight and wisdom, so relevant to our times, and wow, it is really beautiful. I want to spend some time now talking more explicitly about your upcoming immersion because I think it's an incredible opportunity to really get something that no one's ever been able to get anywhere, which is this deep mystical dive into Jesus's authentic teachings, Christ consciousness, through the lens of your 55 years of scholarship and teaching and practice, and bringing in other luminaries like Neil Douglas Klotz that you mentioned before. It's really a very unique way to upgrade our whole relationship to Jesus and Christianity, really a Christianity 2.0 that's world-centric, that's joyful, that's centered in the values that can bring us together rather than separate us into little separate competing rival factions on this planet. And so, really excited about this program. And we invited Matthew to teach this. It's a summation of so much of his life work. It's a unique opportunity to dive deep into your own Christ conscious nature and really make this tradition alive, vibrant, mystically important in such a beautiful way. So it's called The Path of Christ Consciousness. Nurture the Christ within by illuminating your divinity and claiming your mystic truth. You can find it at the URL mysticalchristpath.com, mysticalchristpath.com. And this is going to go far deeper than a course or even an advanced course. It's what we're calling an immersion. This is a deep dive where you're going to have scholarship, you're going to have practices, you're going to have integration groups, you're going to go deep into workshops. It's a chance to really immerse yourself in a worldview that can liberate you in profound ways. And I think it has the potential to truly be life-changing, and I'm confident that Matthew will deliver. So, Matthew, I'd love for you to share in your own words some of what you're excited that to have people come away from this 6-month immersion with you, and then we go through the units and some of what you're going to be teaching and some of the what you're going to be bringing in with different faculty and breakout groups and that sort of thing as well.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. That was a wonderful summary. And I do feel that way. I was excited when I got your invitation to make this program an immersion because I do see it as a summary of my cert and my teaching all these 55 years in trying to bring alive this creation spiritual tradition, which is a different version of the Christ story that I think comes much closer to the real Jesus than does this fall redemption tradition that dominates still in a lot of Christianity and has turned a lot of Christians into kind of sourpusses and maybe dangerous detours along the way. So and again, I stand on the shoulders of so many others, including the historical Jesus movement and so forth, but also the emergence of the cosmic Christ myth or symbol or archetype that was present in the early church. It's very much there, and Paul, the first writer in the New Testament in the Christian Bible, writes about the cosmic Christ, and that's been lost when we've psychologized religion overly much. When we don't begin with the universe, because the Bible begins with the universe, and Jesus' story began that way because that's the Jewish way of looking at things. You know, Rabbi Heschel says that awe is the beginning of wisdom, and then he defines awe as the encounter of the human mind with the universe. So, hey, that's creation spirituality. And so many solid rabbis like Rabbi Heschel over the years have affirmed that this path that I've been taking in trying to unpack the real Jesus, who was, of course, Jewish, is a Jewish path. And it does make a big difference, and it will make a big difference to not only how we interpret Christ and Jesus, but how we interact with other traditions. And so one of the guest speakers we will have on, guest teachers, is a rabbi who's written a wonderful book on Jesus, Rabbi Zaslow. It's a really good book, and he's a wonderful guy. So he's going to be one of these guest teachers. And you mentioned, of course, Neil Douglas Klotz of Aramaic fame, but also Mirabai Starr, who's a wonderful interpreter of the mystics and a lover of the mystics in our time. Many of you know her, I'm sure. And Bruce Chilton is a great scholar of the New Testament in our time, and he's going to be with us for a day. And John Philip Newell is a wonderful scholar of the Celtic tradition. And I've always said that the Celts are the ones who, in Europe, who got Jesus right, who got Christ right, because the Celts always centered religion on nature. And I mean, when they were being true to themselves. And so theirs is a profoundly creation-centered tradition. And the Celts, settled all the way down the Rhineland into northern Italy, which is where we got Francis of Assisi. And Hildegard was on the Rhine. And all these great people, Meister Eckhart, they were all deeply touched by the Celtic tradition. So John Philip Newell has been doing a wonderful work in our time in recovering the Celtic tradition. And he is Celtic. He's from Scotland and so forth. And so Andrew Harvey will be with us, and he's always a person of dynamism and trying to help reinvent the Christian tradition. And Dr. Christine Cleveland will be with us, who's written a wonderful book on the Black Madonna, on the Divine Feminine. And she's helping people rediscover the Black Madonna. And I think that's an archetype for our time because it brings together the cosmos and the Divine Feminine, and also people of color who have often been, what should I say, less than well treated by Europeans who call themselves Christian.
It's quite an all-star cast of characters. I wonder if we can actually just go through the units and give us a little bit of teachers, really. I mean, you get some of the best.
They're all characters. You're absolutely right. Andrew Harvey is definitely a character.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really an incredible roster of faculty. So let's actually go through the units, and the units are sort of broken down by month. So each month is a sort of a deeper dive into one dimension of the real teachings of Jesus and this path of Christ consciousness. So unit 1 is called the real teachings of Jesus, Jesus as mystic. Can you share more about what you'll be going into in that unit?
Right. We'll kick off with that. And the Jesus classes will cover 2 months of our 6-month commitment. So it's the third is laying the foundation of his realness and his teachings. And then the last 2/3 of the class, the other 4 months, will be dedicated to different mystics, you see, who you've called the torchbearers, who interpreted Jesus in their lifetime and in their teachings and in their actions, and we'll see how they did it. So just as we have a marvelous collection of characters who are going to become on separate days to teach the list I just gave you, we also have these marvelous characters that I call the mystic prophets through the centuries. And I've alluded to several of them, especially from the Middle Ages. But here at the beginning, we begin with the real teachings of Jesus, Jesus as mystic. And so let's look at how that helps to interpret Jesus for us. What is a mystic? And how was Jesus a mystic? He was very much a nature mystic, of course. He was a peasant. His family worked the earth. They were simple farmers. Plus, his father was a carpenter. So he had that. And he taught that to Jesus. So Jesus carried this energy. And of course, himself, he chose the art form of parable telling to tell the world. He didn't, he wasn't writing books and he wasn't lecturing a lot, but he was creating stories, which is an amazing art form because we remember the stories. Stories are easy to remember because you can identify with them, but it's an art form. So Jesus was an artist for sure. That's just part of his creation mysticism as a young man. And of course, he spent his adolescence with John the Baptist in the desert. And in Jesus' day, there were lions living in those deserts. So he had to learn something about the wildness. And of course, his mentor, John the Baptist, ended his life badly, or his life ended badly insofar as he got his head chopped off by a representative of the emperor, so then in the empire. So that's a pretty big and hard lesson to learn when you're a teenager and your mentor gets his head chopped off. So that Jesus carried that story with him right up to his own death. So there's so many stories there and so many ways in which he is a mystic. And I want to bring Howard Thurman in too, because Howard Thurman is a wonderful 20th century mystic and prophet who really was a spiritual genius behind the civil rights movement, very close to Dr. King. And he visited Gandhi and so forth, who taught him nonviolence. So we want to bring that in. And the second unit will be the real teachings of Jesus, Jesus as prophet. So the whole role of the no in Jesus' life and the courage it takes to say no, and his turning over the money lenders' tables in the temple and so forth that got him in so much trouble. How did Jesus deal with his anger and his moral outrage at not only at the Romans who were occupying his land and his culture and trying to pervert it, but also with members of his own tribe, the Jewish teachers, and who were busy arguing with him and one another. Arguing and debating is a big part, actually, of Jewish spirituality, using your mind and telling what's on your mind and listening to objections and so forth. So how did Jesus interfere? Because Rabbi Heschel says the essence of the prophet is to interfere. How did he do it? Well, one way he did it, of course, was through stories, the parables. That was not a direct attack on anybody. He just throws out the stories and invites people to jump in and apply them to themselves. And it's a very powerful method that he chose. So that will be the first 2 months, Jesus as mystic, Jesus as prophet. Then we move into these torchbearers or mystic prophets. So the third month will be dedicated to Hildegard of Bingen, this wonderful 12th century genius, musical genius. She wrote 10 books, many of them on science, and she was a healer, and she was a prophet. She spoke directly, wrote letters to emperors, to popes, to abbots, to bishops and archbishops, complaining about them, that they were, as she wrote one pope, "You're surrounded by evil men who cackle like hens." She did not hold back. And so she had a prophetic role to play as well as a great mystical role. And she also painted her images and visions. And we'll share some of her paintings because there are great lessons, great stories in her paintings, and as well as in her amazing music. But the second person we'll treat in the Unit 3 is Thomas Aquinas, who's not been given the credit as a mystic that he was. And some people think he was just a super rational thinker who wrote a lot of intellectual books. But he was a lot more than that. He was a giant as a hurt-filled mystic. He's the one I cited earlier about joy being at the center of divinity itself and of what it means to be human. So in many ways, he's been distorted over the centuries. And I've enjoyed very much recovering him as a mystic. And then our fourth unit, the fourth month, will be dedicated to Meister Eckhart, to Mechtilde Magdeburg, and Julian of Norwich. And these three great mystics came after Aquinas, and they played out in their culture and in their writings wonderful lessons of mysticism and prophecy. For example, Mechtilde Magdeburg was a Beguine, which was a member of the women's movement. Beguines were a women's movement in the 13th century. And she kept a journal all her life. It's a beautiful, powerful piece. And she talks about all the elements of living and suffering and fighting and being misunderstood and all that, but in a powerful and poetic and useful way. And Eckhart is, in my opinion, the greatest mystic of the West, and I'm not alone in that. Many Easterners think he's the greatest mystic of the West. Coomaraswamy, the Hindu, believes that way. He said reading Eckhart is like reading the Upanishads. And that's about the greatest compliment a Hindu can give anybody. And Suzuki, who brought Zen to North America from Japan, he says that Eckhart is far and away the most important religious figure in the West, the most important mystic, etc. So Eckhart is always a mine of richness and articulation of the mystical and prophetic journey. And he was prophetic himself, and he actually was condemned by the Pope a week after he died. And that's why people haven't known him as well as they should. But I've spent a lot of time, I've written 3 books on him, and I've learned so much, and so I'm trying to bring him back. And today, scholars agree he was condemned because of his justice-oriented support of the women's movement, the Beguines, and the poor, the peasants of Germany with whom he worked. He was the first intellectual to preach in German, which was the language at that time, 14th century, of the poor. Then Juliana Norwich is the first woman to write a book in English. And her book, which she rewrote several times in her lifetime, is just brilliant. Yes, Juliana Norwich lived through the bubonic plague, a terrible time when people were dying all around. They had no science then to deal with the causes of it. But she kept her love of creation and nature fully alive. She said, God is the goodness in nature. And her book, the first book ever written by an English woman, is just beautiful to read and to get into. So those 3 great mystics, Eckhart, Mechthild, and Julian, will be treated that unit. And come the next month, we're moving to the 20th century. Father B. Griffiths, a wonderful monk from England, who spent over 50 years in an ashram in India. And he was a real pioneer in the interfaith relationship of Hinduism and Christianity in our time, and a very holy man. It was my privilege to know him near the end of his life. A very brilliant man. It's a man of the soul. Then Mary Oliver, who many of you know, is one of the great North American poets and mystics of our time. And I just think that what she did in her poetry, as she calls herself a praise poet. But it was not an easy journey for her because she was abused by her father as a child. So she had to first go through this great darkness before she came to this realization that her vocation was to be a praise poet. And of course, she found her healing and her praise mostly in nature again. And then Teilhard de Chardin will treat this wonderful scientist and mystic and poet, a Jesuit priest, who developed a whole different way of seeing the Christian story in the 20th century. He died in 1955, and he almost single-handedly brings back the understanding of the cosmic Christ, the Christ cosmique. He was French. And he says, I can't find anyone, theologian or layperson, who's interested in talking about the third nature of Christ, the cosmic Christ. Well, I am. I wrote a whole book on that. And we all should be today because we're recovering the cosmos thanks to science. But there's this dimension to it, to the cosmogenesis by which we understand evolution today, this dimension of the spiritual and the sacred that Teilhard was a real champion to put forward. And of course, Teilhard was a real big influence on Thomas Berry, who was a great mystic of our time. And so the last month, Unit 6, will include Thomas Berry and also Dorothy Sola, a wonderful teacher of the mystics who's originally from Germany, but taught at Union Theological Seminary for many years. She loved Meister Eckhart and the Beguines. She wrote about both. And Thomas Merton, who was this 20th century Catholic monk, who was the real thing. I alluded to him earlier today. And we'll bring in some of John of the Cross and this archetype of the Black Madonna that is being rediscovered in our time too. And I think it's a wonderful gathering of contemporary thinkers and practitioners, torchbearers, mystic prophets. And in all of this, we're not putting these people on pedestals. what we want to do is to bring the mystic and the prophet out of ourselves. But, it's important to have models and to have mentors. And that's the whole point. All these people interpreted the real Jesus in their lifetime and wrote about it, and they invite us to do the same. So that's the purpose of the course is you, yourselves, all of us who want to come alive and live out a full existence. And I think the story of Jesus, properly understood, is a great way to do that.
Well, what an amazing, groundbreaking, unreplicatable program this is going to be. Again, it's all at mysticalchristpath.com. Amazing synthesis of 2,000 years of mystical history distilled into what can be most relevant for our moment now. Really amazing stuff. I should mention a few other things. So because this is an immersion and it's more in depth, we're going to have a special integration facilitator. This really helps to empower you to take in the teachings and practices and really work with how that transforms your life. So that's Reverend Gianluigi Guglielmetto.
They call him Gigi.
Gigi.
It's
Okay.
easier to say.
Great. So this program is going to be more in depth each week. So it includes 120-minute, that's 2-hour live weekly teaching sessions with Matthew, which includes a lot of time to do practices together and have Q&A. You'll also get recordings of every session, both video and audio, as well as word-for-word transcripts. There'll be a 90-minute live integration session on one Thursday per month. Gigi is going to be leading that. There are self-organized study groups. This is a great way to deepen and create a community of practice together. There are 7 live guest faculty workshops, which really enhances all the different teachers that we mentioned earlier, from Andrew Harvey to Mirabai Starr to Neil Douglas Klotz. You also have interactive exercises and questions for each lesson, as well as an online community group. So it's a much deeper dive than a typical course. And the reward is that you transform that much more and you really emerge with a whole revitalized sense of how the Christ path can manifest through you. So it's going to be an amazing program. The investment is $3,000 for the 6 months. And we also have a payment plan available that is on the site. If you apply now, you'll save $300 off tuition. It's going to start on June 10th and run through December 18th. So I really encourage you to go over now, read the whole page, tune in, and if you're getting yes, then submit an application. We do keep the enrollment limited to this for intimacy and for maximum learning. It really is an opportunity of a lifetime to do this work. All the program sessions are going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific. Teaching sessions are live on Tuesdays. Integration sessions are one Thursday per month. And then the guest faculty workshops are also on Thursday. They're staggered a little bit. So you get recordings for all these sessions, integration, elective sessions, and there's also great testimonials on the page of all the people who have studied and worked with Matthew, the godfather of literally this field of the new revitalized understanding of mystical Jesus and Christ. And he mentored and inspired so many other teachers and really been at the forefront of making Jesus into a real influence mystically in how we can evolve our lives and our planet. So you're in great hands. And again, the whole program is laid out in detail at mysticalchristpath.com, and you'll get $300 off if you apply right away. So Matthew, beautiful to spend this time with you. Anything you still want to share with folks who are considering doing the immersion with you into the path of Christ consciousness?
Well, again, I want to thank you, Stephen, for coming up with this idea. And for me personally, I'm very excited about this because it is kind of a whole circle for me, bringing together the best that I've learned over the last 55 years, but also is an adventure because we're launching, well, what I call Christianity 2.0. I think all religions today have to strip down to their essence and link up together, become a powerful force for good in the world because we're up against some very dark forces. We have to be stronger, smarter, and simpler in our spiritual practice, I think, and apply it in all our work, whether it's as parenting or profession or as citizens. We're called on to be the best we can be. And what did Carl Jung said? That is to the mystics we owe what is best in humanity. And so I think the mystic dimension needs to really come out of the closet and fast. And I think Jesus is a great exemplar of that. And also, I ran across this line recently from um, T.S. Eliot. He says, the mystics or else despair. The mystics or else despair. There is a lot of despair in the world today, and for pretty good reason. Humans are facing our own extinction. And so let's call on the mystics, the mystic in us and the mystic in our various traditions, and see if we can do better as human beings. And let's enjoy the process too, and have fun along the way. So I really look forward to meeting you who want to go deeper. And I think it is a special opportunity for all of us. And again, I thank Steve for his intuition that is inviting us together.
Well, it's a blessing, Matthew. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
your lifetime of wisdom with all of us. And thank you all for joining. And if you'd like to go further, again, the details are at mysticalchristpath.com, mysticalchristpath.com. And the program is called The Path of Christ Consciousness. Nurture the Christ within by illuminating your divinity and claiming your mystic truth. So thank you so much. Many blessings.